All right, guys, so we're going to do a little intro into another form of factoring, and we'll do this form of factoring tomorrow. But this part right here, where we're finding the magic numbers, is the hardest part about this way of factoring. And I want to do just a separate day to practice this so that when we get into factoring tomorrow, it's just a little bit easier, okay? So the key to this lesson is you need to have a calculator in front of you because if you don't know your multiplication facts very well or your division facts very well, you're going to have to utilize that calculator quite a bit in order to find these magic numbers, okay? So today is all about, we're not doing any kind of factoring today, but we're finding these magic numbers that will help us in factoring tomorrow, okay? And the goal of this is to find the two numbers. And the key to this is that there are only going to be one combination of these two numbers that work, all right, to satisfy two things. And the two things that this has to satisfy is it has to multiply to get a certain number, and these same two numbers also have to add to get a certain number. And it's going to be easier to see what I mean by that when we look at an example, all right? The key to this is that the two numbers have to fulfill both of these things. They have to multiply to get a certain number, and they have to add to get a certain number. So let's jump in and look at this first example. And I have like a specific way of teaching this, and that's only because it's what works best for my brain, okay? So here we go. You might be able to get these a little bit faster than the way that I'm going to do them, and that's if you know your multiplication facts pretty well, okay? But I'm going to go through this pretty slowly so that if you're not super familiar with those multiplication facts, you can still do it, okay? So here we go. We need to find two numbers, and they have to be the same two numbers that satisfy these two things. They have to multiply to get 24, and the same two numbers have to add to get 10. So the way that I do this is I make this little chart because this is how I organize in my head. And in this chart, all right, this left-hand side, what I'm going to do, all right, is I'm going to list all the numbers that multiply to get 24 and then to see what they add up to. And those have to add up to 10, okay? So you might be able to get this really quickly off the top of your head, all right? But let me just kind of break down the process. So I'm going to start thinking about numbers that multiply to get 24. And I'm going to start with 1 times 24. Okay, those two numbers, 1 and 24, all right, would multiply to get 24. But if I added 1 and 24 together, I would get 25. And I don't want that. I want them to add up to 10. So 1 and 24 are not my magic numbers. So let's try 2 times 12. Now, 2 and 12 would multiply to get 24. But if I added 2 and 12 together, I would get 14. And again, I want those two numbers to add to get 10. So those don't work. So now I'm going to list 3 times 8. And I can see that 3 times 8 multiply to get 24. But if I add 3 times 8 together, I get 11. And I see that I'm going in the right direction. All right, but that still does not get what those two magic numbers need to add up to, which is 10. And so now I'm going to do another combination, and I'm going to do 4 times 6. And 4 times 6 multiply to get 24, all right? But 4 times 6, if I add those together, I get 10, which is exactly what I want, all right? 4 and 6 satisfy both things. They multiply to get 24, and they add to get the positive 10, all right? So in this combination, 6 and 4, or 4 and 6, are my magic numbers. And that's all we're doing today is just finding those magic numbers. I'll show you how it connects to tomorrow, okay? But today we're just finding the magic numbers. So let's try another one. All right, so we need to find two numbers that multiply to get 200 and add to get 54. So I'm going to set up my little chart, and I'm going to find two numbers that multiply to get 200 and add to get 54. All right. So I'm going to start at the beginning, and I'm going to do 1 and 200. All right, so 1 times 200. All right, these multiply to get 200, so that's good. But if I added them together, I would get 201, all right, which is not the 54 that I want. So that doesn't work. All right, let's try 2 times 100. Okay, so 2 times 100, all right, multiplies to get that 200. But if I add them together, I get 102. And one more time, that doesn't work. But I see that I'm at least going in that right direction because that sum is getting smaller, okay? Now, if I tried 3, if I divided 3 into 200, I would get a decimal. So I'm not even going to write those down, right? So let's try 4. So I'm going to do 4 times 50, okay? Because 4 times 50 multiplied to get 200. And then if I add them together, exactly what I want. All right, I want them to add together to get that 54. So 4 and 50 are my magic numbers. And again, that's where we're pausing today, is just finding those magic numbers. Now, these first 2 examples were pretty easy because we had them multiply to get a positive number. Well, the next 2 that we're going to look at now, all right, is now we have to factor in the fact that we now have some negative numbers, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and kind of give you the process that I have here, but these ones are a little bit harder, okay? So here we go. I'm going to make my little chart, and it's going to be the same kind of setup, where I'm going to find 2 numbers that multiply to get negative 80, but this time they have to add to get a positive 2. So here's the deal, all right? I know that if I'm multiplying to get a negative number, that means that one of those numbers has to be positive and the other one has to be negative, okay? Now, whenever I think of these numbers, though, all right, I'm actually going to first start listing numbers, though, that just multiplied to get a positive 80, all right? So I'm going to start with 1 and 80. And here's the thing that I want to look at, all right? Because the number that they have to add to get is a positive number, all right, that means that the sign of the bigger number has to be positive as well, all right? So I'm going to make, all right, the smaller number negative. And now I'm going to add those together. So negative 1 plus 80 gives me 79, and that is not good, all right? So negative 1 and 80 don't work. All right, I'm going to try 2 now. So I'm going to write down 2 and 40. And I want the bigger number to match the sign of what they're adding to. So I'm going to make my 2 negative. And if I add those together, I get 38. Still not what I want, all right? But I know I'm going in the right direction. So negative 2 and 40 is not good. All right, let's try 4. 4 and 20. All right, so one more time, because this number right here is positive, I'm going to make my bigger number positive. So that means my smaller one has to be negative. So negative 4 times 20 gives me negative 80. But if I add those together, I get a positive 16. All right, so again, I'm in the right direction, but that's not my answer. All right, I'm going to jump now to 8 and 10. Okay, I'm going to keep my bigger number positive because this number right here is positive. So I'm going to make my 8 negative. And now if I add those together, I get a positive 2, which is exactly what I want. I wanted 2 numbers that multiply to get a negative 80, but add to get a positive 2. So negative 8 and 10 are my magic numbers. Okay. All right. Let's do one more, and then I'm going to pause and do my next video, okay? So here we go. Find 2 numbers that this time, all right, multiply to get a negative 54, but add to get a negative 3. So I'm going to set up my chart. And I'm going to list down numbers that multiply to get a negative 54, but add to get a negative 3. Okay. So here we go. Just like on that last one, I'm going to write down numbers that multiply to get a positive 54, and then I'm going to adjust the signs. So I'm going to start with 1 and 54. But here's the thing, all right? This number right here is a negative number, all right? So just like we did on the last one, I'm going to make the bigger number match that sign. So I'm going to have a negative 54 now. So 1 times a negative 54 gives me that negative 54. That's good, all right? But then now, if I add those together, I get a negative 53. And that doesn't match. So these are not my my magic numbers. All right, so let's try 2 and 27. So I'm going to have that 27 match the sign of that negative 3. And so then 2 times a negative 27 gives me the negative 54. But if I add those together, I get negative 25, which is not my magic numbers. All right, but going in the right direction. All right, let's do 3. All right. 3 and 18. Okay, so 3 times 18. And one more time, I'm going to have the bigger number match the sign of what they're supposed to add up to. So I'm going to make that 18 negative. So if I'm adding those together, I get a negative 15, all right, which does not match my negative 3. But I'm going in the right direction. All right, so let's try 6 and 9. All right, I'm going to have that 9 be negative because it matches the sign of that negative 3. And if I add those together, I get that negative 3, which is exactly what I wanted. So 6 and negative 9 multiply to get negative 54. And then if you add them together, they also get the negative 3. So 6 and negative 9 are my magic numbers. All right, guys, I'm going to pause here, and then I'll come back and do 5 and 6.